writers of the New Testament, and how they are either eyewitnesses and therefore primary sources, or they got their account from an eyewitness, which makes them secondary source. Okay? So, but you remember that suicide note that I showed you? There's always the question, how do we know that these people actually wrote those things? Okay? There's a good reason for that. The person who came to India with the gospel, Thomas. There is a gospel of Thomas. Okay? And there are many funny things in that gospel. Many of the things do not correspond to the gospels written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The gospel of Thomas is different. Okay? Then there is the gospel of Barnabas. There are quite a few other gospels. And though they may have some facts common with the gospels that are a part of the New Testament, they also contain some other information. Okay? But the gospel of Thomas was not written by the Thomas of the New Testament. Not one of the disciples of Jesus. Someone wrote centuries later pretending to be Thomas. How do we know that? We know it if the work contains what are called anachronisms. No? We do not expect someone who wrote 400 years back in his writings to mention Neil Armstrong on the moon. Obviously, there's something wrong. You get it? So, very often, these books contain anachronisms. And a careful scholar can pick what is not consistent with someone who would have written at that time. So, Gospel of Thomas, we know, is not original. Okay? It's a fake. It's a fake gospel. So, how do we know that these are genuine? Do we have testimony to that? Yes, we have. Okay? This is Hierapolis. And there was a famous man who lived here whose name was Papias. Papias of Hierapolis. Okay? Little bit about the timeline so you get to know where we are talking about. You'll have to take, so wait, let me see if I can speed up things. Yeah. Okay. So, this is the timeline. So, this is when Jesus was, if you look carefully, Jesus Christ born in BC. But that sounds a little funny. Jesus born before Jesus, before Christ. No? Okay, this is because of a calendar error. So, we're familiar with numbers in school. So, numbers go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, -1, -2. There's a 0 in between. But did you notice? There's no 0 here. Those who made the calendar made a mistake. Okay? So, after 1 BC, we have 1 AD. So, there's a year lost over there in the calendar. Okay? So, there are some calendar errors, which is how it happens like this. So, Jesus was born before Christ. Okay? So, that sounds funny, but that's how it is. So, then, this is John the Apostle. He was perhaps the youngest of the apostles. He outlived all of them. Perhaps the only apostle who was not martyred. All the others, they met untimely ends. And this is when John died just before or just after the turn of the century. Okay? Then, John had a disciple. He was Polycarp. He was a disciple of John. He was a bishop of Smyrna. Smyrna is a place mentioned in the Revelation, if you remember. Yeah. So, this man was John's disciple. He studied under John, and Polycarp had a companion. His name is Papias. Okay. The church fathers, meaning the church leaders who lived at that time and wrote, they are usually referred to as the church fathers. Okay, not used in the sense in which father is used in today's world. Okay, so the church fathers wrote about Papias as a companion of Polycarp. They both were great friends. He is described as a hearer of John, not a disciple of John. It's Polycarp who's the disciple. But Papias was a close friend. He became the bishop eventually of Hierapolis. Papias writes, and some of what he has written is very interesting. You will notice he is not an eyewitness to the events in the life of Jesus, but he knew John personally, and John knew Jesus personally. Okay? So this is what, and both Polycarp and Papias died for their faith and what they preached about Christ. Okay? They both were martyrs. This is what Papias writes. I shall not hesitate also to put into ordered form for you, along with the interpretations, everything I learned carefully in the past from the elders, and noted down carefully for the truth of which I vouch. For unlike most people, I took no pleasure in those who told different stories, okay, but only in those who taught the truth. Nor did I take pleasure in those who reported their memory of someone else's commandments, but only in those who reported their memory of the commandments given by the Lord to the faith and proceeding from the truth itself. And if by chance anyone who had been in attendance on the elders arrived, I made inquiries about the words of the elders, what Andrew or Peter had said, or Philip or Thomas or James or John or Matthew or any of the Lord's disciples, and whatever Ariston and John the elder, the Lord's disciples, were saying. For I did not think that any information from the books would profit me as much as information from a living and surviving source. Okay, so Papias is very valuable because he knew not just John, but the other apostles as well. And he seems to have been a very eager person digging into what Jesus said, as these men remembered. And then he says, the elder used to say, Mark in his capacity as Peter's interpreter wrote down accurately as many things as he recalled from memory, though not in an ordered form, of the things either said or done by the Lord. For he neither heard the Lord nor accompanied him. Who? Mark. Mark did not know the Lord. But later, as I said, Peter, who used to give his teaching in the form of cherai. And there's what it means, useful anecdote about a particular character. Okay, it's a form of literature. So, but had no intention of providing ordered arrangement of the logia, meaning teachings of the Lord. Consequently, Mark did nothing wrong when he wrote down some individual items just as he related them from memory. For he made it one concern, not to omit anything he had heard or to falsify anything. He writes about Mark that Mark wrote things down very carefully. Okay? Then, so, just for the thing, okay, this is actually the tomb where John Mark, the evangelist, is buried. Okay? So, we're not talking about imaginary or mythical characters. Real persons who wrote down real stuff. Okay? And this is where John Mark lays buried. Papias also wrote down, Matthew put the Logia, okay, in an ordered arrangement in the Hebrew language. So, though we think of the New Testament written entirely in the Greek language, Papias, 2nd century witness, says Matthew's Gospel was written in the Hebrew language originally. Okay? Then, this is Matthew's tomb. This is where he is buried. Now, we go back to that timeline. To another important character. Okay? This is Irenaeus. Irenaeus was disciple of Polycarp, who in turn was disciple of John. Okay? John the Apostle. Disciple of Polycarp. He was Bishop of Lyon. Okay? So this is what Irenaeus had to write. He writes, Luke recorded the teachings of Paul. After the deaths of Peter and Paul. He wrote after the Hebrew Matthew, indicating that there might have been a Greek Matthew following the Hebrew Matthew. Okay? So, the Hebrew Matthew at around the same time as Mark before John. So, you have a chronology here. Says, first, who wrote? Who wrote first? Okay, Matthew wrote first. Followed by Mark and Luke. Followed by John. Not exactly what scholars often say. Now, there are people who say Mark was written first and okay, there are theories. But then, this is not theory, this is testimony. Different from theory. Okay? So, this is the tomb of Luke. I like to show this so that there are real people. Okay? We don't venerate tombs. We don't pray to them. But it is good to know that they were real flesh and blood individuals. Okay? So, this is Paul. He was executed by beheading in AD 67. Shortly after that, Luke's Gospel was written. Okay? So, that is what Irenaeus says. So, this is when Paul wrote. Then, by the way, Paul was executed a couple of days after Peter was executed. So, Peter was crucified. Paul was beheaded. Paul could not be crucified because Paul is a Roman citizen. You can't crucify a Roman citizen. Okay? So, hence the difference in the way the two apostles were executed. Well, this is a church building called St. Paul outside the walls. Okay, so it's a strange name. This is the inside, right at the front. Okay, there is a glass floor, and you can see underneath the glass floor is a cave. A cave where people would go to see the tomb of the Apostle Paul. Paul has two tombs. This is where his body is buried, and there's another tomb where his head is buried, because he was beheaded, no? So the two went to two different places. So inside the cave is Paul's tombstone. Very simple. It simply says Paulo Apostolo Martyri, no? Which tells us something about the very simple lives that the apostles lived and how the early church functioned. Very sharp contrast to the grand hall that now stands over his tomb. Okay? These holes were for pilgrims to put their hands in and touch his bones. But the church custodians found that the bones were becoming smaller and fewer. Smaller because they were wearing down with pilgrims rubbing them. Fewer because some were taking away souvenirs. So they decided they have to stop, and now you can no longer go and touch anything. There's a glass slab which covers the whole thing. Okay, this is where Paul was buried. Paul said, have I not seen Jesus our Lord? So much of the New Testament was written by eyewitnesses. Okay, Francis over there had asked a question last time, and it might be a thought which might be there in some of our minds. When we are referring to Matthew as an eyewitness, John as an eyewitness, it doesn't mean that they were eyewitnesses to every event that took place. Okay, that's a clarification. That so though Luke writes about the virgin birth of the Lord Jesus Christ, okay, all the gospel writers, their entire testimony, they were not eyewitnesses to it. Okay, but they themselves were witnesses to some of the events. I mean, not talking about Mark and Luke, they were not eyewitnesses at all. Okay, eyewitnesses to some of the accounts, but also incorporating what they acquired from others. Okay, Matthew, this is what Irenaeus writes. Okay, lest we lose track. Irenaeus writes, Matthew published his own gospel among the Hebrews in their own tongue. So it's not just Papias who's saying that, but Irenaeus says that as well. Matthew published his own gospel among the Hebrews in their own tongue. When Peter and Paul were preaching the gospel in Rome and founding the church there, after their departure, meaning death, Mark, the disciple and interpreter of Peter, himself handed down to us in writing the substance of Peter's preaching. Luke, the follower of Paul, set down in a book the gospel preached by his teacher. Then John, the disciple of the Lord, who also leaned on his breast, himself produced his gospel while he was living at Ephesus in Asia. Okay, so remember the question that we had asked? Do we know who wrote them? Yes, we have testimony. And Irenaeus should know, because he was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of John himself. Both Polycarp and Irenaeus were martyrs. Irenaeus met his end in the arena. He was torn apart by wild animals to whom he had been thrown. So these are serious people. For them, writing about these things was a life and death affair. Okay? Then, Irenaeus also puts something down which we can think about. It's not possible that the Gospels can be either more or fewer in number than they are. Okay? For since there are 4 zones of the world, he's talking about north, south, east, west, in which we live, 4 principal winds, while the church is scattered throughout all the world, and the pillar and ground of the church is the gospel and the spirit of life, it is fitting that she should have 4 pillars, breathing out immortality on every side, and vivifying, meaning making them alive afresh. From this it is clear that the Word, the artificer, meaning the maker of all things, being manifest to men, gave us the gospel fourfold in form, but held together by one Spirit. Okay? So, the early church, it had 4 gospels. Now, there are people who say, hey, why haven't they included the gospel of Thomas? Because from the very beginning, 4 gospels, no more, no less. Okay? So, when we are talking about these men, who? Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Then the others who wrote the New Testament, like Paul. James, the writer of Hebrews, Jude. Can we talk about them as being competent? Yes, because they knew him. Can we say they are reliable? We have a small problem here. Just as we had a problem with the Romans, that they were deeply prejudiced, these were his friends. So they will write nicely about him, don't you think? Yes. But there are limits to everything. Our Indian culture is different. Jewish culture is different. In Jewish culture, there is one God who created all things and all people. There is no God but this one God who created the entire universe. He is spirit. He doesn't have a physical body. For a Jew to think of a human being as God, very difficult. He can think of him as a nice man, as a great man, as a great teacher, as a prophet, but that's as far as a Jew can go. Okay? He can't take the step and call him God. Very difficult for a Jew to call another man God. But these were Jews, and they refer to him as God. Do we have corroborative evidence? Apart from the fact that we saw places, things, culture, then of course the Titulus Crucis. All corroborating what these men have written, we will now view the writings of the Roman historians as, yes, corroborating with the gospel accounts. Okay? When the Jewish Talmuds refer to Jesus as one born out of wedlock, that in its own way corroborates what the Gospels record as the virgin birth of Jesus. This is how a critic will look at it. Then, when the Jews refer to him as a sorcerer, they are confessing he performed miracles. Okay? That's what sorcery is. You're doing things which a human being cannot do. But they are claiming he did it with the help of evil spirits. But while they are saying this, they are testifying to the miracles that were performed. Whether he is God or demon possessed, we will deal with it later. Okay? But inadvertently, without intending to do so, they are testifying to miracles performed by him. Then the Jews, as well as Roman writers, and you remember Marabar Serapion, the Samaritan writer, they all refer to him as a philosopher teacher. Okay? So that also corroborates what we read about him in the Gospels. Then, in one way or the other, they refer to his claim to being more than a human being. Roman historians talk about how he convinced his followers to worship him. Jewish Talmuds refer to him as a blasphemer. A mere man calling himself God. Okay? But they testify to his claims to being more than a man. Then, the manner of his death. Of course, there is no problem with that one. Because the Gospels, the Jewish Talmuds, and the writings of the Roman historians converge. All are agreed he was executed by crucifixion. Okay. Then what happened after that? The Nazareth decree stands silent witness to the uproar that the empty tomb had caused and the investigation of Rome and a testimony that his tomb was empty. But did he rise from the dead or not? That is another topic. But there is corroboration. All right?